At issue tonight, the government is promising new legislation to protect minors online. The Conservatives aren't waiting to slam it, saying Liberals want to limit free speech.
Go down the list of things that Justin Trudeau disapproves of, and you can imagine all of the things that will be criminalized. What he should actually do is look into his own heart and ask himself why he was such a hateful racist.
This is yet another example of Pierre Poilievre being irresponsible and not serious, and choosing to play politics instead of actually focusing on what matters.
So is this about protecting kids or limiting speech, and what to make of the debate and the way it is already? Hi there, I'm Rosemary Barton, here to break it down tonight on At Issue. Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, and Althea Raj. Andrew, let's start with you. This is the government's second attempt, really, on this piece of legislation. And you can already see how they're trying to frame it, which I think is different than the way they were doing it initially, really focusing it on how children need to be protected online and other groups. What do you make of where the debate is before we've even seen anything?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, unlike the previous efforts at regulating the internet with C11 and C18, there's actually a legitimate issue here to be addressed, which is there is all kinds of really nasty stuff online. Everybody knows that. For the most part, I think existing laws should be capable of dealing with most of it, but there's no doubt there are some things around the edges, the so-called lawful but awful stuff that has some interesting legal questions surrounding it. So I don't have any problem with the idea of such a bill in principle. At the same time, their earlier attempts at drafts and their general approach to the internet and free speech issues does not fill one with confidence that they're going to get the balance right. So I'm certainly prepared to be alarmed by what they propose. But just saying flat out before they've even shown it that the bill is dead on arrival or whatever language they used, it seems to me a bit hasty. So let's wait and see the bill first.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it was previously about hate speech, which I think is what sort of sparked concern from people, because who would define what that was? Now they seem to be talking about protecting people as opposed to censoring or
and there was provisions for takedown orders that
Yes.
could really put a chilling effect. There was even things where you could sort of in advance say, I think somebody's about to post something, and could you please put a restraining order? That's clearly beyond the pale. So as I say, their reputation precedes them on this, but maybe they've got the message from the critiques of the earlier draft.
Chantal.
Yes, but it's still hard to see how any of those lofty goals will be fulfilled in practice. Beyond virtue signaling, yes, protect kids, but what's the mechanism to actually do that? And both parties this week spent time on how they wanted to protect kids. The Liberals saying we're going to go with, we're going to bring in legislation that we promised, except that it's hard to see in practice what it will accomplish. So let's wait for the bill. And then the Conservatives on another bill that came from the Senate on Pornhub and the need to show that you're of age to see pornography. Pierre Poilievre said he supported the bill. But here again, it begs the question, what is the process to prove that you're of age? Surely it's not like some of the websites I see with grandchildren where it says, say which year you were born in. Well, they can really count by age 12. They're not going to write 2010.
No.
If they need to write 2001. So, so I'm kind of curious on both sides as to what in practice do these parties propose to do to get to the protection that they say that they want to extend to kids. You can agree with the goal, but think, what are the mechanics here?
And even the Pierre Poilievre's office, I should say, did tell us yesterday that yes, he supports it, but he doesn't support having to present your ID or some sort of digital imprint online in order to get to those sites. So if not that, then what? I think is a good question there. Althea, your thoughts?
Well, there's a few things. One, we don't actually know what's in the bill because it hasn't been tabled yet. So what we do know, my colleague Raisa Patel wrote about this today. Yes, the government is trying to frame it as a child protection bill, so it will protect sexually exploited children. It will protect children against harming themselves, against actions that induce them to harm themselves, against content that is used to bully them. But it's not just about children.
No.
The whole sharing of intimate images without your consent, that's supposed to be addressed, as well as the language that was more controversial the first time around, things that promote hatred, violent extremism, violence, terrorism. But I think what's most important in this debate is that both parties are trying to frame themselves as who best protects children. So you have the Liberals now using this bill, reframing it as a child protection bill, and then you can contrast that with Mr. Poilievre's stance on parental right and all the trans debate that we've been having with regards to Danielle Smith's actions in Alberta, as well as the porn adult bill that has come from the Senate is in the House of Commons. And both parties are trying to use this bill at the same time to attack constituencies that are traditionally their opponents. So what was interesting in the Prime Minister's remarks today is that nobody actually asked him about this. The press conference was over, and then he was like, I would also like to talk about this because people are asking about this. Well, none of the reporters asked you about it. And then he went on to talk about Pierre Poilievre's actions, but suggesting that the Conservative leader is favoring a digital ID. And a lot of Mr. Poilievre's constituency is very worried about a digital ID, and it fits into the conspiracy theories of the World Economic Forum. And Mr. Poilievre, in his press conference on Wednesday, used this bill to attack Justin Trudeau, suggesting that he was going to criminalize Muslim parents who are worried about their children at school. Again, so it is really interesting. It is going to be a debate about which party you trust to protect your children. I think that's the frame. In fact, both things they can win on.
Yeah, I just so people know, there are pieces of legislation like this in many other countries, Australia, New Zealand, there are places in Europe. So it is not unheard of. I wonder, though, given what we've heard, Andrew, from both of those leaders, whether there will be a rational, substantive debate around this, because it doesn't seem to be heading in that direction already.
Yeah, I mean, Althea said it'll be about which party do you trust more. I suspect it'll be about which party do you fear more. And not necessarily without reason. There is a potential in a constituency on both sides to trample over free speech for differing reasons. And getting the balance right on these things is really hard. I mean, you also, both parties are going to try and use this issue to get at other issues. So I don't doubt that the Liberals will be trying to paint the Conservatives, for example, as being racist and sexist for opposing draconian restrictions on speech in the name of fighting racism and sexism. I think that was what motivated, I mean, lots of things would motivate Pierre Poilievre to want to bring up the blackface thing, but I think that was part of it, was to try to get out in front of that and turn it back on the Prime Minister and to weaken some of his credentials. And frankly, there's always been the suspicion that part of the Prime Minister's ostentatious anti-racism and feminism has been as a kind of shield in case some of the skeletons in his closet came out, as eventually they did.
Chantal.
So I don't usually make predictions, but I will predict that nothing will come out of either proposals. That we are here in virtue signaling territory, that the Liberal bill will be problematic enough. I noted that the Prime Minister, in his attempt to talk about it, said it would trigger a debate. Well, debate isn't legislation. It's just a conversation to talk about something. And if you're going to go for the Pornhub restrictions, but you're against every means to verify that the person saying I was born in 2000 is actually born in 2000, then you're going nowhere either.
Last word to you, Althea, 30 seconds.
Oh, well, to me, they're a little different. One, I think on the harms bill, I think Mr. Poilievre would have been best served, frankly, to hold his fire and then attack it for what's actually inside it, because I'm sure there will be poison pills in it. But now it seems a bit of an overreach, and I wonder if it is framed successfully as a child protection bill, if he can put the toothpaste back in the tube. On the Senate bill, there is no mechanism in the bill to define how old you are. That is left to the government in the regulation stage. And I believe that they do not know how to do that in a way that doesn't jeopardize people's privacy. Some of the ideas that we've seen floated in the United States and that have been used are like a third party. You could totally reverse the tables and see how Pierre Poilievre would be outraged about such a suggestion. I think it's more like they weren't sure how that bill could be done.
Okay. We're going to leave it there. I'm going to mark this day on my calendar as the day Chantal predicted something, and then we'll come back to it and see whether it proves
Call
to be
me
true.
in 3 years.
Okay, well, after the break, the federal government responds after Quebec asks for $1 billion to cover the cost of asylum seekers.
This is not and should never be about numbers, about cash, about money. It's about people. It's about human beings.
Should Ottawa pony up more money, or is it time for a different response? That's next. It's not the first time Quebec has said it can no longer handle the huge influx of asylum seekers arriving in that province.
We're calling upon the federal government to take its responsibilities and act before we get to this crisis point.
Ottawa says it's willing to help, but this cannot be about finger pointing.
Is there something more we can do? Maybe. But take into consideration everything we're doing as a government. Let's sit down and discuss on that basis.
Premier Legault says he will meet with the Prime Minister in the coming weeks because his province simply can't offer services to more people without support. Is there a bigger solution here, or is Quebec using this issue just to get more money from Ottawa? Let's bring everybody back. Chantal, Andrew, and Althea. Probably both of those questions I've answered could be true. But Chantal, let me get your perspective from Quebec. Obviously, this is an issue, but now the government is saying we're paying for all these things, education, beyond healthcare and housing, and we can't do it anymore. There's simply too many people. Is this a valid argument they're making?
Up to a point. Pressure is real, as it has been and is still real in Toronto. Why Toronto and Montreal? Because that is where the country's two major airports are and where a lot of asylum seekers have been landing. And for sure, both cities suffer from the same problems on housing, on social services. In Quebec, a labor shortage that affects schools. So if you're going to open classes, you need teachers. So that part of it is totally real. It's also true that the Quebec government, for one, has been putting pressure on the federal government to, for instance, reimpose visas on visitors from Mexico who make up a significant percentage of asylum seekers. So yes, pressure is real. That being said, François Legault is a premier who desperately needs a win. He's fallen back in the polls to the Parti québécois. Everything that he's been doing so far has not worked in restoring the CAQ as the dominant force that it was maybe only a year ago. And I think he is discovering that it's harder to get action from a federal government when you are as unpopular as premier as Justin Trudeau is in Quebec.
Yeah, I mean, I guess he's going to get the meeting, which is already something, Althea. Whether he gets to walk away with $1 billion, I would be very surprised. But your thoughts?
Well, I think there's lots, actually, that the federal government can do. And I don't want to take away, I do think the Quebec government is kind of scapegoating asylum seekers and pointing the blame solely on the federal government. And, you know, some of the problems that they've talked about in education, for example, are actually long-standing.
Yes,
but there's a lot more the federal government can do. And to Pablo Rodriguez's comments just before the break, you know, money is a source of dignity as well, and there is not enough in the system. So right now, the federal government pays for refugee settlement services, but they are not obliged to pay for asylum settlement services. So there is a gap there, and it is not fair to put that on the provinces. The federal government should be responsible for the borders. They should be doing more to tell people, frankly, not to come to the country, that their asylum claim is going to be refused on all of these different grounds, because once they come here, they have to wait, on average, 15 months before their case gets finalized, another 6 months if they appeal. By that time, they're anchored. They may have had children who are Canadian citizens. The backlog is enormous. More resources should be put into this. 165,000 people are waiting for their case to be heard. 2 years ago, we were finalizing more claims than we were receiving. Now we're getting almost 3 times as many claims every month as we can finalize. And migration is not going to end. We're going to have climate migrants. The world is a scarier place. So more money is needed in the system. We should not be running a system of hotel networks to house asylum seekers. We should have housing for asylum seekers. And all of this, frankly, the federal government needs to do, needs to lead, and needs to plan.
But throwing more money at it, too, Andrew, doesn't seem to Althea's point, really get to the root of the question, which is, can we take more people in? And if they're coming without us planning, how do we prepare for that? What should we be doing?
Yeah, well, we can take more, and I would support taking more. I think we can afford to be a generous country, and it's always proven to be our benefit in the long run. But yes, the federal government has responsibility for the borders. I would like to see a high level of immigration, a high level of intake of refugees, but therefore we've got to set aside the funding to resource it. So there's no getting around that. I would prefer that the federal government was paying attention to these kinds of federal responsibilities. I would also add defense, for example, in that, rather than embarking upon new and expensive social programs for, where they're not necessarily as pressing a need. We have absolutely a pressing needs at the border. We have pressing needs in terms of national defense. These are absolutely essential federal responsibilities. And if they're crying poor now, saying we can't afford it because of all these other things that we've taken on, I think they've got some misplaced priorities. All that being said, I will say it's ironic, of course, to see the provinces doing, the province of Quebec in this particular case, doing what they always do, which is to bristle at any federal intervention in any way, shape, or form, particularly in social services, except when there's money involved, when they're all too willing to welcome federal intervention. So the irony of the provincial position is also apparent here.
30 seconds to you, Chantal.
I am not convinced that this debate, the way that it is being framed, is going to do any good, but I am convinced that it will do harm to the image of asylum seekers, many of whom are not here for the wrong reasons, and their kids, with the Quebec government now deciding that it shouldn't be forced to offer daycare to people who actually have a work permit and are seeking asylum in this country. It's a debate that is not being handled on either side on an adult basis.
Well, let me just end on that point about the daycare and the appeal the Quebec government has launched. Is that getting any blowback in the province? Because it does raise eyebrows when a government's going after how children should be
Every
looked after.
opposition party, so to set it up, the Quebec Court of Appeal has ruled that Quebec must offer asylum seekers' children places in publicly funded childcare centers. Those places are offered on if you're in the line, you get your place. So there's no fast track here. No. The Quebec government wants to appeal this to the Supreme Court and says those places and subsidized daycare should be for Quebecers only. The fact is that they should be for people who pay income tax and on that basis are allowed access to public services. And that means asylum seekers with work permits actually are paying taxes and should be able to access public services. So it's a complicated issue, but it has brought the ire of every single opposition party upon the CAQ.
We're going to take a short break here. When we come back, the Conservatives won't give up the fight to get more answers about what happened with the ArriveCan app. That's next. The Conservatives are pushing hard to keep ArriveCan alive as a political issue and have now passed a motion to subpoena the founders of GC Strategies to answer questions in front of a parliamentary committee.
The fact that these two individuals have already ignored previous requests is not just unfortunate, but it's a sign of grave disrespect to Canadian taxpayers. And now it's up to the Liberals and NDP to vote with us to ensure that Canadians find the truth.
So that vote inside the committee has happened, but will the House of Commons agree to subpoena these witnesses, to compel them to show up? Will that help get answers to the millions of dollars that were given to the company for little work? Chantal, Andrew, and Althea all here. First of all, we don't know that they're not going to show up. We know that these gentlemen have said in the past they wouldn't show up. Althea, and I know we all will have cast our minds back to Karl-Heinz Schreiber days when the German businessman was subpoenaed to show up in front of a committee, but it was very different. He was held in prison, he was about to be extradited, so he had to be taken out of prison in handcuffs to come here. That's not what's going to happen here, but how big a deal is it that the Conservatives have gone to this point?
Well, I think, frankly, they should testify before the Commons Committee, and I hope that they will come and testify before the Commons Committee, and I hope that the Liberal government will want to participate fully. As far as we all know, there is nothing tying the Liberal government, I mean like the political staff, cabinet ministers, the Prime Minister, to this, what we talk about as a scandal.
Politically,
the ballooning cost, the possible, the breaking of the rules for sure, as the AG pointed out and as internal investigations have pointed, but there is nothing tying the political side to the bureaucratic side. This is a boondoggle for the bureaucracy that needs to be fixed, no matter who is in government. And for that reason, it's in all of their interest to talk about this in a way that is constructive and work together. Now, that being said, I can understand why the Liberals don't actually want a full airing of the facts, because the Conservative leader last week basically said that Justin Trudeau was corrupt after the AG had released her report. There's a complete gross misrepresentation of what the AG said. And language like that, like we saw from Andrew Scheer a while ago, tweeting that these were Justin Trudeau's corrupt consultants. I forget what the word was they used, but these are, Justin Trudeau did not pick these consultants. So there are problems to be fixed.
Yeah.
Perhaps this is not just a problem at CBSA. It would be nice for them all to work together on this.
Andrew.
I have to beg to differ with my colleague. I think there is something that ties the Liberal government to this, and it's called ministerial responsibility. Whether or not there was overt criminality and whether or not anybody in the government, in the cabinet, knew about it, it's their business to know what's going on in their departments. It's their business to set the culture that goes on in the department. ArriveCan was only the worst example that we know about of what seems to be a more generally broken contracting out process. People seem to have got into their heads that it was okay to set up these multi-layered contracting processes where people skimmed off money just for introducing them to other contractors. How did that happen? Why didn't anybody look into it further? Were there any alarm bells rung? Who, in fact, did know at what point? These are all valid questions. You don't have to accuse anybody in the government of criminal wrongdoing or anything to say, this happened on your watch. It shouldn't have happened. It's a serious matter. It's not just one individual, off on his own. It seems to have been more systemic.
Yeah, but it happens all the time. That's the reason why there were no alarm bells, unfortunately. I'm not saying it's okay, but
maybe the reason it happens all the time is maybe the reason it happens all the time is we haven't been as vigilant in enforcing the doctrine of ministerial responsibility.
Okay, Chantal.
I agree with Andrew. The money is no object culture seems to have been the prevalent culture, in part because of the pandemic. But this goes beyond reasonableness, and the pandemic made us do it. I can totally understand that it might have happened because of the bad headlines that ArriveCan was generating and political pressure to do better, which is not malfeasant. But that being said, there should be no surprise as to what the opposition parties are doing with this. The template for that, it's not the same kind of controversy, but the template for what the Conservatives, but also the Bloc and the NDP are saying, is basically the sponsorship scandal. And what did that accomplish? It made the Liberals unelectable for a decade.
I got to leave it there. I'm sure we'll talk about this again. This is far from over. Thank you all very much. Have a good weekend.